Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Lies Between Us by Cynthia Cooke, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Tom Phillips pocketed the picture of the brunette with $1 million smile and stunning green eyes. She was beautiful, magazine perfect, and yet there was a hint of vulnerability in her eyes that reached out and grabbed hold of him, compelling him to want to help her. But could he trust her? He couldn't stop wondering what her story was. How did she get involved with a man like Bodega? Why risk her life by working with the FBI? Or was she setting him up? At her request, their conversations in this meeting were off the books. No one knew about the op but his partner Sam and their boss out of the New York office. He was taking a huge risk, but if he could nail Carlos Bodega, it would be worth it. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked. At this time of the afternoon, the room was practically empty. There was a woman sitting in a booth by herself, a slew of papers and an open computer in front of her, and a man in a suit nursing a beer and watching the news on the TV screen hanging on the wall. Tom tapped his fingers on the long mahogany bar and looked up at the array of top-shelf bottles lining the wall. "Scotch on the rocks." He glanced at his watch as the bartender placed the drink in front of him. Mrs. Bodega should be there within 10 minutes. Tom took his drink to a table in front of the window so he could watch the street. He quickly made note of the cars parked out front, which pedestrians were on the move, and which were just hanging around. He'd been talking to Anita Bodega for weeks. She'd give him bits and pieces, all verified and accurate, but nothing that would be enough to take Carlos down. He needed more. The FBI had been working for years to infiltrate Carlos Bodega's organization, but each time they'd gotten close, he'd slip through their nets. This might be their first real break, but at what cost? What would Anita Bodega want in exchange for giving him the goods to take down her husband? She had to know the risk would be extreme. Her husband had people everywhere. His phone vibrated. He slipped it out of his pocket and glanced down at the screen. Kat. His wife had been expecting him yesterday afternoon. He should answer, tell her he was fine, tell her everything was okay, but he didn't. He had to admit to himself that he dreaded going home. He'd had a hard time facing her ever since he'd learned Stuart Marsters, infamous head of the National Counter-Terrorist Agency known as the CTA, was her father. That man had run an organization that dove deep into the shady areas of the intelligence agencies with little regard for rule and the damage they caused. If that wasn't bad enough, her sisters Jeannie and Becca Marsters had thrown in with Josh Cameron. The three of them were running a new CTA offshoot group focused on cleaning up Stuart Marsters' messes. Too little too late, if you asked him. Tom had kept tabs on their organization ever since he'd learned Emmerich, the terrorist that had killed Kat's dad, still targeted the sisters. He wanted to use their abilities he still didn't trust or understand. Kat swore to him she wasn't involved, but lately he'd heard whispers the Marster sisters weren't the only ones with special abilities caused by the CTA's experiments with gene manipulation all those years ago. There were others, and recently Emmerich was killed by the group after he was found kidnapping several of Marster's original subjects. Tom didn't know how to process that, to come to terms with and accept that his wife had powers. How could he trust her? He wasn't even... "Tom Phillips?" The woman spoke with barely a hint of an accent. He looked up and blinked slowly. Anita Bodega's picture didn't do her justice. Makeup was flawless, hair perfection, her clothes and jewelry expensive. The woman's poise and posture spoke of extreme wealth and the confidence of royalty. He supposed in her world she was. So why would a woman like her risk everything to help him and the FBI destroy her husband? He gave a slight nod. "Can I buy you a drink?" "Patron on the rocks," she told the bartender as he walked toward them. He nodded and went behind the bar to fix it. She took a seat and leaned across the table. It's nice to finally meet you." A whiff of expensive perfume reached him. "I didn't expect it would be at a high-class hotel in San Francisco," Tom said as a man with slicked-back dark hair walked into the room wearing dress pants and a dark jacket. His gaze moved over them as he took a seat at the bar. Tom didn't like the way he watched them through the mirror on the wall. Mrs. Bodega smiled. "Every month or so I come to the city for a weekend shopping trip. I get bored living in the mountains. I much prefer the energy of the city, and it is so beautiful here, is it not?" "It is very beautiful." He looked at her over the rim of his glass and took a sip of his scotch. Whether the woman knew it or not, the man at the bar was there to keep an eye on her, either to keep her safe or make sure she stayed in line. Tom could only guess. Carlos Bodega ran one of the 3 biggest cartels in South America. His reach was worldwide. He wasn't a man to take chances, and he didn't make mistakes. "These are my sisters." Anita took out a photo of 2 young women, also stunningly beautiful, and pushed it across the table toward him. "They're both brilliant, attractive, and attending Columbia University in New York. When you can prove to me they are safe and can't be touched, I will give you what you want." He frowned. "They are safe right now. Why put them in jeopardy?" He watched her eyes as he asked the question. They usually told more than any words spoken. "I overheard Carlos on the phone. He has plans for them. He wants them in his organization and has already been grooming Sarah." She pointed to one of the girls in the picture. "The boy she's dating is loyal to Carlos. He's been teaching her things." "I'm sorry." Tom shook his head. Men like Carlos had no respect for family, for people, for life. All he wanted was power. "I wasn't given a choice when I was forced to marry Carlos. My father worked with him. I became his property when I turned 18. Their arrangement didn't include Savannah and Sarah. My sisters were supposed to be off limits. But for all I know, my father is indebted to him again." Tom pushed back his chair. "I'll have it done by tonight." "Thank you. You'll let me know when? I'm in the penthouse." She passed a key card across the table that would allow him to reach the penthouse floor from the elevators. He saw the man's eyes in the mirror follow the movement. He pocketed the card. "You'll be hearing from me. Watch your back. You have an admirer." He gestured toward the man at the bar. She turned and looked at him, her face visibly going pale. "You all right?" Her smile trembled at her lips. "Yes, thank you." He got up and left the bar. He had work to do. Chapter 2. Cat Phillips pulled in a deep breath and tried not to panic. How many times had Tom been late from a meeting, a business trip? Many times. So why was she so worried this time? When he hadn't returned her call yesterday, she wasn't worried. They often went days without speaking when he was away on business. So why did she have this nagging feeling in the corner of her brain that something was wrong? She tried to call the hotel directly, but the phone in his room just rang. She bit her lip and called his colleague Sam, who she'd met at a Christmas party last year. Feeling slightly ridiculous, she apologized for bothering him and told him there was a small problem at the house and she couldn't get in touch with her husband. Not a big lie, there was a problem. She was about to go into a full-blown panic. Sam assured her he was with Tom at the conference and that they had decided to stay another day. He'd make sure Tom gave her a call as soon as he found him. She thanked Sam and hung up the phone. He'd been one of the first people she'd met after they relocated to New York from Reno. He'd assured her everything was fine. So why didn't she believe him? She made herself a cup of tea and tried to relax, waiting for either Sam or Tom to call her back. When an hour had passed and she hadn't heard from either of them, she picked up the phone again and dialed her sister. "Becca, I need you and Jeannie," she said, her voice shaking. She hoped she wasn't panicking over nothing. If she was, she trusted Becca and Jeannie to tell her. "Jeannie's here with me," Becca said. "I'll put you on speaker." They were triplets, and after what had happened last year when Daddy died, they each knew no matter how much time they spent apart, each of them would drop whatever was happening to be there for the other. It was an unspoken truth. and Kat knew she could count on them. "I'm here. What is it?" Jeannie asked. "It's Tom. I think he's gone." "What do you mean he's gone?" Becca demanded, her voice sharp. "He went out of town for work," Kat said. "He was only supposed to be gone for a few days, but he didn't come home when he was supposed to. I called the hotel and he never checked out. A coworker says he's still there, but I can't reach him, and it's been 2 days." She sat at the table, thankful Mark and Annie were at school, and she had the house to herself. "Did you look for him?" Becca asked. "I mean, really look?" "No, Becca," Kat said, annoyed. She was expecting the question, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "I turned it off. I had to in order to save my marriage. Tom didn't take caring about us, about what we can do, well. He needs time. That's why I'm calling you. Why I need your help to find him, or to tell me to stop worrying and that everything is okay." "For God's sake, Kat, turn it back on," her sister Becca yelled through the phone line. "If you have a feeling Tom's in trouble, then you need to listen to it." Kat pulled the phone away from her ear and scowled, her heart dropping in defeat. Becca was right. She knew that, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "It's not that easy. I made a promise." "To who?" Becca asked. "To Tom. After Daddy and everything that happened, after a terrorist murdered their father and almost killed all 3 of them, she promised she would turn it off and never mention it again. Not only for their sake, but for Mark and Annie's too." "Kat, you know we can't do this for you. You're going to have to do it," Jeannie said, always the reasonable sister. "I don't think I can," Kat admitted, her voice shredding through the phone. "Kat, you've got this," Jeannie said, her voice firm but gentle. "You've done it before." "No, Jeannie, you don't understand. I don't got this. I'm a mess. A complete mess." Tears flooded her eyes. "You're doing fine," Jeannie said. "Where are Mark and Annie?" "At school." "Good. Call Tom's mom and ask if she will watch them for a few days. Becca and I will make a few phone calls and see if we can trace his movements. Where was the last place he was seen?" "San Francisco at the Omni. He was there for a conference." "All right," Jeannie said. "We are at Dad's." She paused. "At our house on Puget now, and we'll head that way. Get on a plane. We'll meet you at the hotel. Don't worry, Kat. We will find him. Everything will be okay." "Thank you, Jeannie," Kat said, feeling much better. "Do you think I'm overreacting? His coworker said everything was fine." "What's his name?" Jeannie asked. "Sam." She looked at their contacts on the computer. "Sam Wagner." "Okay, I'll look into him too," Jeannie said. "And Kat, no, I don't think you're overreacting. Becca's right. If your gut is telling you something is wrong, then you need to listen to it." "Turn it back on," Becca said. "I warned you something wasn't quite right with Tom, that he wasn't on the up and up." "Becca!" Kat heard Jeannie admonish. But what could Kat say? Becca was right. She knew Tom was hiding something too, and if she were honest with herself, she'd known for a very long time. "I'm right, and you both know it," Becca said. "For the sake of my niece and nephew, who I haven't seen in way too long, I want you to turn your abilities back on pronto." "I will, I promise." Kat cringed as she said the words. The truth was, it wasn't her promise to Tom that kept her from turning her abilities back on. It was because she'd been afraid. As much as she hated to admit it, there was something off with her husband. Now she would be forced to face it, whether she was ready to or not. "Good. We'll see you soon." Becca disconnected the line. Kat entered Mark's room and pulled his Spider-Man suitcase from the top of the closet and started to pack his bags. Luckily, Tom's mom was home and would love to have the kids. She set the packed bags by the front door, knowing her mother-in-law's driver would pick them up before getting the kids from school. She drove to the airport and 2 hours later was on the way to San Francisco.